Hello. During this presentation, we will reveal the different aspects of the registration of medical device in South Korea. My name is Nicholas Clary. I'm the founder of Cobridge Consulting. We established in Korea in 2007 and we are helping manufacturers to export to South Korea, typically helping them with their regulatory strategy. We will cover different topics such as the Korean medical device market, also an overview of the regulatory process, the framework, a comparison with existing market or more well-known markets such as the US and the European Union, few definitions, the basic steps or major steps for the registration, the classification of the products, the substantial equivalence, the in-country representation or local representation, and the pre-market and Korean good manufacturing practice, KGMP. First of all, I'd like to say that despite barrier such as language or culture or access to information, once we overcome those barriers, and you will see that we will reveal the most important information. Once we overcome those barriers, it becomes easier to figure out about the whole strategy or approach when registering medical device in South Korea. So don't feel lost. You will see that it's much easier than you would think first. So the market is quite similar and is advanced and is an established market such as in US or in the European Union. Most opportunities or sales are based on the install base or new technologies. The market is highly regulated. That's one important thing to know. But despite its difficulties to penetrate, there are lots of similarities with the US markets and regulation. As a matter of fact, the regulation was established and is now adjusting towards the US regulation. So it's shaped in such a way that it's more understandable for someone who is familiar with the US regulation. One important thing to know for the market is that most doctors study in US, and once they do that, then they expect to find the same kind of products when they return to Korea. So their influence on the choice of product when they work in a major hospital or even a smaller one, the influence of these doctors is very important. So the market, for two reasons: one is sales and the second one is regulatory. The market pairs could be, for instance, a US clearance and then clearance in South Korea. How about the regulatory process? One thing that you should know is that KFDA, which was famous at the time, it doesn't exist anymore. It's been replaced by the MFDS, the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. been replaced due to scandals, mostly related to food. And that's why we have now, it's been upgraded to the ministry level. And the framework of the regulatory system is based on the Medical Act. So all those medical devices have to comply with the requirements of this Medical Act. What are the major steps of a registration? We start with the classification of products, then establish an equivalence, assigning a license holder, prepare the file, testing, then review whether or not the technical file is involved, and KGMP certification if required. It's not always the case, and then placing on the market. Regarding the framework, most applicants or manufacturers have already their product registered in US or in the European Union. So in this presentation we found relevant to add a comparison analysis between the three markets to give an overview whenever it's required or whenever it's useful. Brief introduction on the participants when ensuring the safety of the medical device. We have three major stakeholders, such as the manufacturer when it comes to conception and development, or design, or R&D, and the manufacturing and packaging and labeling. Then the vendor during the advertising and sales, and the user, obviously during the using and disposal of the product. The interested parties for the three markets that we introduced before are, so we have in Korea, we have the three regulations. In Korea, Medical Device Act. In Europe, the Medical Device Directive, whether it's for in vitro diagnostic or active implantable or medical device, and in US it's the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. All manufacturers are treated the same way. When regarding the local representation, there's a registered importer in Korea or a license holder, authorized or European representative in Europe, and the US agent in US. The regulators are in Korea the MFDS, the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, and also third party could be involved during the technical file review or KGMP. We will see that later. In Europe, the notified bodies are involved during the whole process. The FDA and also third party could be involved in US. What are the common stages of the government regulations? We identified before the three major stakeholders dealing with the medical device during its life cycle, and we can break it down into three major steps, such as the pre-market, the placing on the market, and then the post-market. So pre-market is to be considered by the manufacturer, the placing on the market for the vendor, and then the post-market for the user. The 3 steps are summarized here on the 3 columns. In the pre-market, which is the responsibility of the manufacturer, the safety and performance is one major item to be considered, and also the quality system. Of course, the labeling is also important to have an accurate description of the products and to have also instructions for use. When placing on the market, the vendor has to ensure has a proper establishment registration, and also advertising should be compliant. Regarding the user, after sale or use of the product, there are also some obligations, and the monitoring of the device, post-market monitoring, is also required. But definition, the summary here of definition in Korea, more or less it's based on the Medical Act. The same goes for the Medical Device Directive, where there is a full definition here of the medical device, and then from the US Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act. The 3 definitions are to some extent quite similar. However, one major point to be considered is the Korean difference between the drugs and quasi-drugs which are excluded from the scope of the medical devices. What does it mean? It's that there should be some caution or care should be taken when applying for registration of those products, because by experience we see that some gels, lotions or similar products which in Europe would, for instance, fall in the definition of a medical device or accessory, then those products fall in the category of a quasi-drug, for instance, and then are regulated by the drugs, and it's far different than medical device, so should be careful. Summary of the major steps. To comply with the Ministry of Food, Drug and Safety, the following steps are required. We've already mentioned them: classification, substantial equivalence, license holder, application preparation, testing, application itself, and KGMP, and then placing on the market. What about classification? We have 5 classes of products in Korea, from the lowest one, class 1, to the highest one, class 4. Comparison between the 3 markets. 4 classes of products. This is similar as Europe. However, in Europe there's an additional class like class 1 sterile and measure function, and this class, and there was an equivalent in Korea in the past, but it has been removed, so we can just retain the four class of products. And in US we have 3 classes. Typically in Europe the classification is given by the Annex 9. There's a notification, KFDA notification also, which gives class of product, and those classes are often updated. And I want to go to the classification approach, which is much similar in Korea as in US, meaning that this classification is already defined. So once we know the category of products, then we know the class. So it's given. It's very detailed. However, if we compare Europe, we have in Europe classification which should be demonstrated or defined by the manufacturer based on different rules. For class of products, we've already said that for Korea, from the lowest to the highest risk. Starting with class 1, what's the approval or certification process? So class 1, this is only a notification, very simple, in the sense that technical information may not be required at this point. It starts from class 2, where the technical documentation is required, and the technical document review is done by a third party. The approval is done by the MFDS. Whereas for class 3, the approval is done and the review is done by MFDS. Also class 4. On top of that, class 4, clinical data is also required. A substantial equivalence. In the substantial equivalence, the meaning is it has to be demonstrated by a proper scientific rationale and supporting document. For that, there's usually a comparison table which is used for each category of product, and the criteria used are such as the intended use, principle of action, raw material, performance, testing method, standard and instruction for use. If we can identify a substantial equivalent in Korea, then no need for SER, Safety and Effectiveness Review. However, obviously, it will be required if we can't demonstrate the equivalency. And it could be partial, so we could have a partial equivalency, but for some items we would have to demonstrate and provide some more information. Comparison between Korea, Europe and US. In Europe there is no such concept as substantial equivalence. However, in US is the case, so the substantial equivalence is similar as the predicate device, and the safety and effectiveness review, again, whenever we can't demonstrate the equivalency, is similar to the pre-market application, PMA. In-country representation, that's a very important strategy that must be defined early on in the process. So for that, what are the requirements of the license holder? The license holder is responsible for coordinating and submitting the medical device registration application to the MFDS. If there is no local business in South Korea for your company, then it is mandatory to appoint the license holder as your representative. But there are 3 options. Appointing distributor, who will take care of everything, such as registration, the license, the product market follow-up, the sales and marketing. You could appoint also a license holder and a distributor. In that case, then the license holder would do the registration, the licensing and the post-market follow-up. And the distributor will take care of all the sales and marketing. Another option is to establish a subsidiary in South Korea in the name of your company, and then the subsidiary becomes the license holder and then becomes the owner of the licenses. For that also, then a consultant could also take care of the registration. Brief summary of the different entities involved in Korea, Europe and US. The license holder in Korea is equivalent to the European representative and the US agent in US. The MFDS third party is equivalent to the notified body in Europe and the FDA and third party in US. Pre-market process or the product license. The pre-market notification for Class 1, we said before, is a very general application, so it does not contain much technical information. It's only a notification and it's a matter of days, if everything is alright, to get the confirmation. For Class 2, 3, 4, which have substantial equivalence, then a technical file must be prepared, much similar to the 510K in US. If there's no substantial equivalence, then safety and effectiveness review is required. This is very similar to the US pre-market notification submission. In such case, the clinical data must be included. Clinical trials are not required, but the clinical data must be approved by an OECD member country or published in an SCI listed scientific journal. Regarding type testing must be done by an independent laboratory, and then this testing should comply with requirements such as ISO, IEC, ASTM or GLP. There are 14 certified test laboratories in Korea. They may have complete scope, cover all products, or limited one. We see some of them are focusing, for instance, in dental, so they have limited scope for the dental products. When there's a submission of foreign test reports, the acceptance is done by an MFDS authorized test lab. So the submission of the technical file, this is submitted to a third party in the case of a Class 2 product, and then approved by MFDS. The other class of product, except Class 1. So there's the review and approval is done by the MFDS. One important aspect is the time frame and cost. The reviewing time for Class 1 is very low. It's a matter of days before you get the approval of the notification, and then the fees are very low. For Class 2, the duration or the reviewing time is also short because it's done by a third party and they have more possibilities to make it short, in the sense that there is more resource on the third party. And that's where the majority of applicants belong to. So the fees are a little bit higher, but the duration, the reviewing time, is lower. And for class 2, with SER, you can see that this is done by MFDS usually, and the duration is higher. For class 3 and 4, the review is done by MFDS. It takes longer and the fees are lower. We already talked about these third-party reviewers. There are 6 companies authorized by the MFDS to perform those reviews. So they are notified bodies and Korean test laboratories. So 2 notified bodies and 4 Korean labs. Once the technical files are approved, it's not, submission doesn't stop here, so there's a KGMP, which is more related to the quality system, and it's recommended to do it at the same time. KGMP is usually seen as an inspection, but in its practice it's more like an ISO, like an ISO 13485 audit. There is a special KFDA notification which details all the requirements for KGMP, and there are also several guidance. In Europe, usually, of course, there are different annexes of the directives, like in the MDD Annex 2, 5 or 6, and the ISO 13485 is usually used as a reference, harmonized standard, and in US this is the part 820. Who is required to comply with those KGMP requirements? Class 2, 3, 4. The requirement for the quality system are very similar to the ISO 13485. Most of the review consists in a review of the device master record, the DMR. Now, how to prepare for this KGMP certification? First of all, preparation of the documents and the submission of the documents. The submission is recommended to do it 2 months before the expected date of the inspection. Usually has to be done in parallel with the submission of the technical file, because it takes some time. Then the review is done by the third party or the MFDS, and then on-site inspection happens, and then the certificate is issued, and the certificate is valid for 3 years. Those inspections are performed by MFDS inspector and third party. There are 4 Korean labs who have accreditation to perform those inspections. Finally, after approval, MFDS delivers a product license and a KGMP certificate. The clearance for the product is done by the license holder. Thank you very much. If you have questions, don't hesitate. You have my email here and my phone number. You can also go to our website. Thank you again for listening to the presentation.